IBESS, Climate Change and Energy Production Part 7, will focus on the effects of climate change, including feedback loops and the potential for a tipping point. The significant ideas are: human activity has contributed to recent climate change. Climate change causes widespread and significant impacts on a global scale. Here is the outline of all the available movies in the Climate Change and Energy Production Unit. Use this outline to find the movie you need for review. This movie is focused here. Human activities are increasing levels of greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, CFCs, and water vapor. The increasing levels of greenhouse gases are causing an increase in the mean global temperature, increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather events, long-term changes in climate, and rising sea levels. This graph nicely displays the change in global temperature over the last 50 years in Fahrenheit. The red bars indicate temperatures above the 1901 to 2000 average temperature, and the blue bars indicate temperatures below the 1901 to 2000 average temperature. The black line shows atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration in parts per million. Notice the correlation between increasing temperature and increasing carbon dioxide levels. Increasing concentrations of greenhouse gases will result in an increase in the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events. The author of this diagram projects that regions in green, including Canada, Scandinavia, Siberia, will become the regions of high food production, as regions through most of the US and Europe will become desert. And an increase in greenhouse gases is likely to cause a rise in sea level due to the thermal expansion of water. Let me be clear, the primary cause of rising sea levels is thermal expansion, not melting ice caps on Greenland and Antarctica. Rising sea levels will result in coastal inundation. So that brings us to this IB syllabus statement, which focuses on the impacts of climate change and extends the 4 impacts that I've just introduced on the previous 6 slides. Take some notes. The potential impacts of climate change may vary from one location to another and may be perceived as either adverse or beneficial. And these impacts may include changes in water availability, changes in the distribution of biomes and crop growing areas, loss of biodiversity and ecosystem services, ocean acidification, coastal inundation, and damage to human health. Water is likely to become more scarce in many locations. Water is likely to become more scarce in many locations. Water will become more scarce because mountain glaciers are melting. The meltwater from glaciers feeds rivers. If the glaciers decline or disappear altogether, many rivers will also decline, becoming seasonal, if not altogether dry. This would include many rivers in Asia and in western South America. Societies that depend on these rivers will suffer. In this slide, you can see the retreat of a glacier in Europe over the last 40 years. As glaciers decline, the meltwater that feeds rivers also declines. Rivers will become more seasonal if they are not altogether dry. This would include many rivers in Asia and western South America. Societies that depend on these rivers for drinking water or growing crops will suffer. In 1950, the snout of the glacier was here, but in 2015, the snout is here. Societies that depend on rivers resulting from glacial melt for drinking water or growing crops will suffer. Some locations may experience more water rather than less. Climate change will increase the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events. Now, we've just looked at changes in water availability due to climate change. Now let's look at changes in the distribution of biomes and crop growing areas. Climate change is likely to cause a northward shift in biomes. The temperate deciduous forests and the grasslands will move north into Canada, Scandinavia, and Russia, while deserts shift into central U.S. and Europe. The diagram in this slide suggests that climate change will cause a northward shift in the oak pine, seen in light green, and oak hickory forests, seen in dark green. But notice the potential decline of certain species, such as the loblolly shortleaf pine in dark blue and the longleaf slash pine in light blue. It would appear that the maple, beech, birch forests will move north into Canada. The author of this diagram projects that the regions shown in green will be the food-growing areas, while the areas in yellow will be deserts. The regions colored brown will be prone to extreme weather, floods, and droughts both. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change indicates that climate change will have a negative impact on food production, particularly corn and wheat, in these countries. Along with a northward shift in the dominant vegetation of biomes, pest species and insects will also shift north. In this slide, we can see the northward shift of an invasive species, S. halepense. The invasive grass outcompetes corn, resulting in reduced crop yields. Now let's look at how climate change impacts biodiversity and ecosystem services. I've already mentioned the potential loss of the loblolly shortleaf pine in dark blue and the longleaf slash pine in light blue. But the loss of diversity and the northward shift of vegetation will impact ecosystem services, such as the ability of intact systems to hold soil, prevent flooding, purify water, and reduce erosion. Not only plant species will shift north, but animal species will shift north as well. Shifting animal species will impact food webs, changing local diversity. The graph on this slide details the loss of coral species from 1980 to 2004. This is not a prediction. This data documents the actual decline in coral over the last 25 years. The loss in coral is attributed to outbreaks of predatory starfish, infectious diseases, destructive fishing techniques, poor land use practices, and coral bleaching caused by especially high ocean temperatures. Melting Arctic ice sheets puts polar bears at risk as polar bears hunt on the ice sheets for seals. This graph displays the steady decline in sea ice measured at its annual minimum between 1980 and 2009. The decline in sea ice will reduce biodiversity on Earth. These photos display the decline in the Arctic ice cap in September at its annual minimum in 1979 and then in 2005. How important is biodiversity to you? If all you care about is cows, chickens, cats, dogs, rats, and crows, then climate change is for you. Now let's look at how climate change impacts ocean acidification. Increases in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere increase the uptake of carbon dioxide by oceans. Remember, the atmosphere is a source of ocean pollution. The increase in carbon dioxide in oceans causes oceans to become more acidic. This is carbonic acid. Increased acidity reduces the ability of mollusks and crustaceans to make their shells, and it reduces the ability of corals to make their homes. Ocean acidity causes a decline in biodiversity. You can see in this diagram how carbon dioxide enters the ocean, resulting in carbonic acid, an increase in the level of acidity in the ocean, resulting in a lower pH value. Keep that in mind. The color change in the diagram, left to right, indicates an increase in acidity. Notice how the diagram indicates deformed shells of animals. Ocean acidification causes a loss of biodiversity. Mollusks and corals, both of which need to build calcium carbonate shells or housing, respectively, fare poorly under ocean acidification. You can see in this graph that the amount of calcification decreases as the pH decreases. Reduced calcification would cause coral reefs to decline during ocean acidification. Corals are habitats for many species: sponges, crabs, starfish, and many species of fish. 25% of all marine life is dependent on coral reefs. A loss of shellfish, animals that make calcium carbonate shells, would reduce the income, if not the entire livelihood, of people who harvest shellfish or serve shellfish. Oysters, clams, and scallops is a $400 million per year business in the United States. The loss of reefs would reduce tourism from snorkeling and dive tours. There is an economic impact and a degradation of the environment for those of us who appreciate biodiversity. Reefs provide protection to coastal communities from the impact of storms. This ecosystem service would decline as reefs suffer due to ocean acidification. Coral reefs reduce wave height as the waves approach the shore, protecting coastal communities from the impacts of storms. This ecosystem service would decline as reefs suffer from ocean acidification. Now let's look at coastal inundation. The thermal expansion of water would raise ocean levels, causing coastal inundation, coastal flooding. Coastal flooding will impact human health and the economy of societies. The thermal expansion of water would raise ocean levels, causing coastal inundation, coastal flooding. Coastal flooding will impact human health and the economy of societies. The thermal expansion of water would raise ocean levels, causing coastal inundation, coastal flooding. Coastal flooding will impact human health and the economy of societies. The melting of the Greenland ice cap and the Antarctic ice sheet would also serve to raise world ocean levels. The melting of the Greenland ice cap and the Antarctic ice sheet would also serve to raise world ocean levels, but it's the thermal expansion of water due to warmer global temperatures that will raise sea levels most. Now let's look at how climate change damages human health. Poverty and limited water availability will serve to harm human health. Extreme weather events will serve to harm human health. An increase in disease will serve to harm human health. This graph displays an increase in the number of malaria cases in the U.S. Insects and disease, like biomes, are shifting north. With more extreme weather and changes in water availability, who suffers the most? As the climate changes, the world will experience environmental refugees. Climate change and an increasing average global temperature has the following effects. Stop the movie now and take some notes. I'll let you study this slide on your own. So that brings us to new IB syllabus statements, but statements that are clearly connected to the impacts of climate change. Discuss the feedback mechanisms that would be associated with an increase in mean global temperature. Both negative and positive feedback mechanisms are associated with climate change and may involve very long time lags. What are the feedback loops, and how well do we understand which loops will have rates that are greater than others? Negative feedback loops would stabilize or dampen change, while positive loops would accelerate it. It's difficult to predict how much climate change will happen because we don't fully understand the actual rates of the positive and negative feedback loops. Remember, global climate models are complex, and there is a degree of uncertainty regarding the accuracy of their predictions. Systems in equilibrium oscillate around a mean value with approximately equal inputs and outputs. In this graph, we can see a relatively consistent temperature over time. A slight increase in the temperature of the system causes a change in the system to dampen the increase, resulting in a temperature decline. But as the temperature declines, a change in the system dampens the decrease, resulting in a temperature increase. This is negative feedback. Systems in equilibrium display negative feedback effects. As the system moves away from the mean, a change in the system causes a reversal. As the system moves away from the mean, a change in the system causes a reversal. A resilient system returns to equilibrium upon disturbance. The resilience of a system, ecological or social, refers to its tendency to avoid tipping points and maintain stability. The question is climate change altering the Earth so substantially that we will exceed a tipping point? So let's look at some negative feedback loops that would serve to maintain equilibrium. Remember, we don't understand which loops will have rates greater than others, thus we are uncertain of the future. So here's a possible example of a negative loop. As temperature increases, more water evaporates to cause cloud cover that reduces the amount of solar energy reaching the Earth's surface, thus decreasing Earth's average temperature. But with a decrease in Earth's average temperature, less water evaporates, cloud cover decreases, increasing solar energy reaching the surface of the Earth, etc., thus an increase in the Earth's average temperature. This is a negative feedback loop that would serve to provide a consistent temperature over time. Here's another example of a negative feedback loop. As temperature increases, more water evaporates to cause more snowfall over the poles that increases the reflection of solar energy from the ice surface. This causes a decrease in the Earth's average temperature. But with a decrease in the Earth's average temperature, less water evaporates, less snowfall, thus increasing the absorption of solar energy, thus the average temperature goes up. This is a negative feedback loop that would serve to provide a consistent temperature over time. Here's an example of a possible positive feedback loop. As the temperature of the Earth increases, water evaporates, and atmospheric water vapor is a greenhouse gas, thus causing an increase in temperature, which causes more water to evaporate. Water is a greenhouse gas, causing more warming, causing more water to evaporate, more warming, etc. So you might be asking, which loop is more important? As the Earth warms, causing more water to evaporate, will there be more clouds for reflecting solar energy, or more vapor for absorbing the long wavelengths radiated from the surface of the Earth? Remember, clouds reflect solar energy. The albedo is high. This is a negative loop, while water vapor absorbs long wavelengths from the surface of the Earth as part of the greenhouse effect. This is a positive loop. Which one of these loops is more important? The answer is, we don't really know. So, as the Earth warms, causing more water to evaporate, will there be more clouds or more vapor? Remember, the high albedo of clouds reflects solar energy. This is a negative loop, while water vapor absorbs the long infrared wavelengths from the Earth's surface, the enhanced greenhouse effect. This is a positive loop. Remember the role of the albedo effect from clouds in regulating the global average temperature. Clouds have high albedo. If more clouds form from more evaporation due to global warming, then there would be more solar energy reflected. Here's another example of a possible positive feedback loop. As the temperature of the Earth increases, the tundra releases more methane. Methane is a greenhouse gas. Temperature increases. As temperature increases, the tundra releases more methane. Thus, the temperature increases further. Here's another example of a possible positive feedback loop. Temperature increases. Polar ice melts. Thus, there's more blue water, less reflection of light, more absorption of solar energy. The water warms, global temperatures warm. More polar ice melts, more water, less reflection of light, more absorption of solar energy, global temperature increases. Can you discuss feedback loops? Always start the discussion with increasing temperature. Our negative loops would involve the evaporation of water and cloud formation, or more snowfall over the poles to reflect light, or an increase in photosynthesis to take up carbon dioxide. The positive loops would be the evaporation of water. There's a greenhouse gas in water vapor. Loss of polar ice caps, more blue water, more solar energy absorbed, or methane release from the tundra, another greenhouse gas which serves to warm the Earth. So with increasing levels of carbon dioxide and an increase in the Earth's average temperature, are Earth systems reaching a tipping point? A tipping point is the minimum amount of change within a system that will destabilize the system, causing it to reach a new equilibrium, an equilibrium from which a return to original states would be very difficult. So with increasing levels of carbon dioxide and an increase in the Earth's average temperature, are Earth systems reaching a tipping point? A tipping point is the minimum amount of change within the system that will destabilize the system, causing it to reach a new equilibrium, an equilibrium from which a return to the original state would be very difficult. Here are relevant IB syllabus statements. Spend some time reading this slide. Define the term tipping point, which I've just done on the previous two slides, and you must understand that the concept of tipping points can be applied to climate change. This cartoon suggests that there may be a tipping point in our immediate future, a point of no return, past which action may not matter. In the science of climate change, there are feedback loops, both negative and positive, that will influence the magnitude of climate change. But our understanding of these loops is not complete. If the positive feedback loops are more significant, have higher rates, than the negative loops, then there may be no way to turn off the change, to stop climate change from pushing us to a new equilibrium. Will Earth systems prove to be resilient? If we can stop the increase in carbon dioxide release, will Earth systems return to equilibrium? And keep in mind that diversity and size of storages within systems can contribute to their resilience and affect their speed of response to change. The magnitude of the ocean or the magnitude of the atmosphere increases the time lags. Thus, it may be a long time before we know whether Earth systems have reached a tipping point. Delays involved in feedback loops make it difficult to predict tipping points and adds to the complexity of modeling climate systems. When the storages are small or the systems relatively simple, such as a predator-prey system, the time lag between the increase in the prey and the increase in the predator, this time lag is relatively short. The magnitude of the ocean or the magnitude of the atmosphere increases the time lag. Thus, it may be a long time before we know whether Earth systems have reached a tipping point. Delays involved in feedback loops make it difficult to predict tipping points and add to the complexity of modeling climate systems. Larger systems, like oceans and atmosphere, are not easily disturbed. They have high inertia. But the magnitude of the ocean or the atmosphere increases the time lag and the delays involved in feedback loops, and thus make it difficult to predict tipping points. And that brings us to the end of IBESS, Climate Change and Energy Production, Part 7.